It's time to get the Planeswalker party started today with our upgrades in light and heavy for the Planeswalker party Precon from Commander Masters. So I'll start this off by saying this is actually one of the harder Precons I've actually tried to tear apart and do things with, because this one's actually pretty well balanced for the most part, but we're going to try to get some better Planeswalkers and stuff into this deck. So let's start off with removing two of the Planeswalkers I'm kind of like on in the most part. First up is the Wanderer. For 4 mana, it's a decent, exile target creature basically, but the static ability doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot for us because unless you're playing in an environment where burn decks are prevalent, you're not really going to stop, a bunch of direct damage off of things. So for that reason, the Wanderer is getting chopped. We're also going to take out the variation of Saheeli's Sublime Artificer in this deck. There's just not enough artifacts here that I want to copy and waste the -2 ability on. There's mana rocks, but you're only going to get a one-shot of turning like a servo into a mana rock for our purposes in the deck, and it doesn't make a ton of sense to go ahead and keep her in here when there's no other big artifacts that really just do big dumb stuff in the deck. A couple more cards in the creatures that I don't like is Fogbank and Wall of Denial. Now I see what they're trying to do with the Precon. They're trying to give you some big fat butted defenders to try and keep the Planeswalkers active. But there's other ways of doing that we don't need to rely on just kind of mediocre walls. Like these are okay in decks like Arcades the Strategist where you're trying to attack with a wall. But here, it's just kind of like, eh. So for that reason, I'm going to kick both of them out of the deck. Another protection type creature that's in here is Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs. Now this used to be a lot better than it was once upon a time, but it's only really good against people who are attacking one at a time or two creatures at a time. If they're attacking you with a swarm, you're not getting much out of this. You're getting one creature for, the 5 or 6 things they're coming at you with. And that's if they don't have any mana to pay for it. So this does not get any better as the game goes on because they're going to open up their mana and they're just going to be like, yeah, you're not getting a blocker. We're going to make sure you're dead. So I'm going to go ahead and take him out as well. Another card that I've been down on these kind of cards before where, you're behind, you can get a planes out of your deck and put it into your hand. And this one is the Cartographer's Hawk. Now, this one in particular, I'm kind of bashing on because it's a little slow. You have to hit with it, and that's after you've cast it and let it sit there for a turn, hit with it, bounce it, you get your land, and then you get to recast it again. Well, then you have to wait through another summoning 6 cycle, and then you got to do it again. So you're taking your time, you're wrapping your mana up into this thing, trying to use it as your ramp mode, and the whole time your opponents are probably getting ahead of you while you're doing it. For that reason, I'm kicking it out of the deck. The last card I'm cutting from the deck is Repeated Reverberation. Now, there's not an instant or sorcery sub-theme here. The instants and sorceries that are in the deck are really things you really only want a one-shot set off anyways, like board wipes. So I'm trying to figure out why they bothered to put this in here, because there's nothing really that good that you want to copy, 3 times, essentially, with the Repeated Reverberation. So for that reason, I'm going to kick it out of the deck. Along with those main deck things, I'm also going to cut out some lands and get some better ones in here. First off, we're going to cut off all the stuff that kind of relies on the basic lands because we're in a 3-color deck, so you're running a lot less basic lands than what you would run in your, 2-color and even monocolor decks. So Frostboil Snarl, Fury Calm Snarl, Port Town, and Prairie Stream. I'm kicking all of them out because you're not guaranteed to have that, requisite thing, basic land in hand to reveal when it comes in, or having 2 or more basics in play, or whatever the basic land requirement happens to be on these things. You're not likely to have them all the time, and there's better lands that we could put in place of them. The other remaining lands that I'm cutting out of here, they're all colorless lands that don't really serve the deck well for keeping you from getting color screwed. There's a lot of double mana pips, white, white, blue, blue, red, red on these cards. We need to be able to cast them at least somewhat reasonably, and so getting rid of these things is going to help. So we're going to get rid of Mobilized District, Reliquary Tower, and Myriad Landscape. Now, Mobilized District was great in Standard as a good, control finisher or whatnot, but it's really not that great in Commander. I'm not a big fan of the card, and it just kind of sits there and kind of messes with our mana, so I'm going to kick it out. Reliquary Tower doesn't do much for us either. Taps for colorless, no max hand size. Well, what mass card draw are we really using that we need to have that extra, clutch of cards? So we're gonna go ahead and remove that. And then as for Myriad Landscape, it's a very slow land. It comes in tapped. You have to pay 3 basically, tapping it and 2 other lands to go and get 2 more tapped lands. So, and you have to get the same lands out of the deck. You can't go get, a blue and a red or a red and a white or whatever. So if you're starving for color, this is going to kind of set you back sometimes because you only get 1 color off of it. So I'm going to go ahead and remove it as well. So what are we updating this thing with? Well, let's start with the Planeswalkers I want to add to this deck. We're going to start with Dovin Bond. With him, we can gain access to a Planeswalker that actually helps us protect our other walkers, or we can draw cards, or we can go ahead and get to its ultimate and really just slow the game down to a crawl so that the Planeswalkers that we're playing out and keeping on the board are going to just take over the game. Then we have Rowan Kenrith. This one caught my eye for all of its modes. The plus ability on this thing can actually force an opponent into a situation they don't want. And it also combos well with a card I'm going to discuss here in just a little bit. So the -2x is a sweeper on this thing, so we can get rid of all the little stuff that can pester our Planeswalkers. And the -8 is a doozy on this thing. Because did you know that Planeswalker abilities are actually considered activated abilities? Yeah, that emblem that we get off of this thing, we can copy every activation from there on out on every Planeswalker we have, making this just a super powerful thing that we just want to get online as quick as we can. We also have another Planeswalker that the ultimate off of it actually benefits all of our other Planeswalkers really well, and that's Teferi Temporal Archmage. Now, this variation of Teferi was actually just reprinted in the Commander Masters set, so it's actually very reasonable to get your hands on a copy of it. The ultimate on this thing, for -10, you get an emblem that allows you to activate Planeswalker abilities at instant speed and on any other player's turn. Now, that is just really silly strong. I don't know if you've ever played with Teferi Master of Time, where you can do his activations at instant speed on any player's turn. But, giving that ability to all Planeswalkers, yeah, that's just kind of nuts. And his other abilities aren't nothing to sneeze at either. The plus will allow us to dig a little bit deeper into the deck to get some things. And the minus allows us to untap our permanents, so you can untap blockers, you can untap artifacts to kind of ramp into other things. There's some applications here that we can use this with. And the last pure Planeswalker I'm going to add here is the Eternal Wanderer. Now, we took out a Wanderer. We're going to put her back in this form because we need to keep our Planeswalkers alive and unthreatened, and this is a great way to do that because you can lock out some artifact or an indestructible creature by chaining that +1/+, loyalty ability on the same creature, because it does not blink back in on their next turn. It blinks back in on your next turn. So if you just repeatedly chain that, you're going to lock that creature out of the game, and it's never going to get a chance to do anything, such as, I don't know, Blightsteel Colossus, plus that, you're never getting that to hit anybody with. We can also use it to generate blockers or possible attackers after, we wipe the board out. And then we can also just go ahead and just nuke everything except for our best creature and their worst creature on the board, leaving us with just, good times. And so this thing is just a great package rolled up into one card. Next up is the card I mentioned when I was talking about Rowan Kenrith. This is Settle the Wreckage. Now, if you see an opponent sitting there building up, a one-turn kill with something like a Crater Hoof or the new white variation of the Crater Hoof, you can just sit on this and wait for them to attack you, or you can use the Rowan Plus, force them to attack before they're ready to go, and you can use this to wipe out their board, or you can, force blocks and weirdness with her as well. Either way, I love this card, and it's forgotten about by a lot of people. I have caught so many people just like, I'm going to Alpha Strike, and you're just like, no, you're not. You wipe out their stuff, and they just get blown out by it. In my digging for ways to protect our stuff, I found another card that I thought was kind of interesting. This is a newer card from the Game Night product that just came out at the end of last year. It's Maeve Insidious Singer. It's a siren that, you pay 3 and you can goad your opponent's creatures. So this kind of puts some work in here by forcing problematic attackers, tramplers, flyers, things that are unblockable, things of that nature that would just hurt our Planeswalkers. You can just force them to look elsewhere for their attacks and keep the Planeswalkers safe. And so what I like about this one, for the most part, though, is it's non-conditional. It doesn't have to do combat damage. It doesn't have to, pay in other than just some mana. There's no life or there's no other conditions. You just do it and you just go boom, 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 boom. And you can do it turn after turn as well. So if you have, a couple turns where you just really need to keep the pressure off while the Planeswalkers keep ticking up, you just keep goading the problem children creatures and keep on going. And the last couple cards are kind of a little bit of a combination, and it is a sort of Planeswalker, but you got to work for it. It's the Might Stone and the Weak Stone and Urza Lord Protector. Now, what you got to do here is you get both of them down, pay 7, and it flips into Urza Planeswalker. The idea here is you get a modal spell off of the mana rocks. You can use it to remove something with the -5/-5, or you can draw a couple cards off of it. You can use that. You can then use that to pay for some of your other artifacts that you're playing to ramp into things. You can use the mana off of this to activate Urza's ability, and then Urza himself can discount our other artifacts in the deck and a few of the instants and sorceries as well. But of course, the end goal here is to get him flipped over into the Planeswalker variation and then ultimate this thing, leaving only your artifacts and Planeswalkers standing and the rest of the board detonated. As for the lands that we're going to do in this light variation, we're going to add the 3 pathways that match our colors, and we're going to add the 3 pain lands that match our colors. So this way, we're fixing our mana, but we're not dumping, hundreds of dollars into the mana base just trying to improve it, because the mana base for this deck is actually not that bad. So with the cuts and the new additions in here, let's see what we got going on here. The Precon itself right now is running online for about $63.95, which is the cheapest I've found any of these Precons out of this new set going for. Then the main deck additions that we're going to add into the deck cost around $19.92. The land additions are going to cost us around $21.81. So when you add that into the cost of the Precon, you're going to get this totally buffed up deck for about $105.68. So that's pretty good. You're going to spend right around $100 to get this thing whipped into shape. So I really appreciate that. So those are the light upgrades. Let's see what we can do and get some heavy duty guys in here and really make this deck hum. So for the heavy upgrade variation of the deck, we're going to keep the same cuts as before, but we're going to add one additional cut so we can go ahead and put a different card in here that I wanted to add. We're going to keep the Settle the Wreckage, the Eternal Wanderer, and Rowan Kenrith from the light upgrade list. Same reason spelled out earlier that why we're going to use those here. So let's go ahead and look at the new stuff. First up is Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. This is arguably one of, if not the most powerful Planeswalker ever printed. Jace the Mind Sculptor could get back at me, but, I personally have horror and nightmares of Teferi sitting across the board from me. This, in our deck, though, it's going to protect our Planeswalkers. It's going to protect us by, being able to tuck something away. It's going to allow us to tap down and cast more stuff and then untap for removal and stuff like that at the end step. And it's likely game over for our opponents as this thing ever ultimates off, because then every draw we have for the rest of the game is just an automatic removal spell for any permanent they have. Another blue-white Planeswalker that does kind of similar, at least on the ultimate here, is Venser the Sojourner. Venser here is going to do some interesting things for us. The plus ability on him is going to flicker any permanent we own, actually. Usually it's control, but this one it's own, and that's an important thing. So what we can do then is we can flicker one of our Planeswalkers that's low on counters. Maybe it got beat up in combat. Maybe you needed to minus it to remove something and you want to reset it back to full. You can flicker it out with Venser. It'll go away, and at the end of the turn, it'll come back in with its full cast loyalty counters. And then, as I was saying, being able to flicker something that you own is kind of important in some games, because theft of your stuff is oftentimes a problem. Like, we're actually going to see the bribery card that got reprinted in the Commander Master sets. You're going to see it probably a little more often than you're used to, because it's re-entering the market. So people are going to start stealing your stuff. Well, if you flicker it with Venser, it's going to remove it from the game, and it's something of our own rather than a control. Usually they say a creature you control. This is your creature you own. You flicker it, and then when it comes back into the battlefield, it's going to actually come in under your control because it loses track of that bribery. We can also use the minus ability on this thing to get in some shots with some of our creatures and bring our opponents down. And it almost becomes a redundancy with Teferi's Exile Ultimate, only in this case it's a cast trigger. So it basically staples on a bonus spell effect of exile target permanent on each spell that you cast from there on out. I'm sensing a recurring theme here with overpowered Planeswalkers in blue-white. We're going to go ahead and hit the next version of Teferi. It's Teferi Time Raveler. Now, this is going to draw a lot of hate from anybody who ever had to face this thing down, but it does a lot for us in this deck. The static ability just tells counter magic to kindly go away. Instant speed interaction for our stuff can happen. They have to wait till their own turn to do it. And then on top of that, we can bounce something to assist in protection of our Planeswalkers, or we can bounce a Planeswalker to reset its counters. Maybe it got low from combat or something like that. You can bounce it back and recast it and get it back up to power. Or we can just sit on that sorcery speed casting ability off of the plus, and then somebody tries to alpha strike us out of the game, you're just like instant speed, blow up everything. There's a lot of applications for Teferi here. And then the last three add-ins we're going to add in here are proliferating abilities. Since we got so many things going on with the counters on the Planeswalkers, a little more proliferate doesn't hurt. So we're going to start off with one of the easiest ones to add in here, and that is Contagion Engine. It's colorless, so it fits in the deck perfectly. You don't have to have perfect mana to cast or anything like that. And the -1/-1 ability on here, when it comes into play, is just kind of gravy. Somebody's threatening your Planeswalkers, you're just like, all right, I'm just going to start nuking your stuff. And then every proliferate will just grow those counters. But the main thing here is the double proliferation activation on this thing. So you get 2 counters every time you pay into this thing and activate it. And then you're just going to be able to ramp your Planeswalkers up as quickly as possible. In that same vein, we're also going to include Inexorable Tide. Now, this can just give us a steady stream of proliferating to bolster the Planeswalkers and push them towards their ultimates that much faster. With every single spell we cast, we get a proliferate, whether it's a creature, an artifact, another Planeswalker, whatever. We're going to get an additional loyalty counter on everything. Just remember, if you're casting the Planeswalkers to do it, you're not going to get the additional counter on the new Planeswalker because it's a cast counter. It'll be on the stack still when it resolves. The last card we're going to add here is almost custom built for this kind of deck. It's Ichor Moon Gauntlet. Now, this is from the Phyrexia All Be One set, and it is so freaking good. What this thing does for us is every time we cast a non-creature spell, it puts a counter on something. And so you can put a loyalty counter, or you can, +1/+1 counter, -1/-, whatever kind of counter you got laying around, you can put an additional one on it. And then every time you have a Planeswalker out, instead of using their abilities, you can use the proliferate ability. Well, if you have several Planeswalkers out and you're just like proliferate, you eventually build up those counters so quickly that it's super easy to get to the 12 minus on there that this thing grants to take extra turns or to set off the natural ultimates that are attached to your Planeswalkers. And before I forget, this was the extra card I needed to cut something out to make fit in the deck. So we ended up cutting out the Spark Shaper Visionary. I like the card, but I don't like the idea of putting my creatures into danger, or my Planeswalkers into danger, because you're turning them into creatures. Yes, it grants hexproof to the things, but you're having to push them into combat, and any kind of flyers or reach creatures can block them. So it kind of negates wanting to send them into combat. And then on top of that, if they have anything like an Arcane Lighthouse or something like that, they can remove the hexproof until end of turn, and that leaves them as sitting ducks. Now, as for the lands in this one, we're going to keep the 3 pathways that I had in the other variation of the deck. So we're just going to remove some basic lands to fit those in. We're also going to go ahead and add in 5 other lands. Actually, excuse me, 6 other lands. It's going to be Steam Vents, Hallowed Fountain, Sacred Foundry, the Shocks that fit the colors, Raugerin Triumph for our Tri-Land, and then City of Brass and Mana Confluence. Because, again, I mentioned I cut all these colorless lands out of here. We need to be able to fix our mana consistently in a 3+ color deck. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to make sure that we can hit all of those double mana pips as we go along. So for the heavy upgrades, what does that get us for the cost that we're paying? Again, it's $63.95 for the cost of the Precon up front. And then you're going to put about $77.38 worth of upgrades into the main deck, and then another $95.36 worth of lands into the main deck, and that includes those pathways. So when you add all that together, it's $236.69 to do the upgrades. It's the heavy variation. And again, that's still not bad. That is like half, or actually less than half, of what I was setting up with the heavy upgrades for the Eldrazi and Sliver Precons. So what do you guys think? I had a lot of fun trying to figure out what to take out of this deck, because it's actually a very well-balanced deck. So I want to know down below, did I take out the right stuff? Do I need to take out something else? Do you think I'm wrong about the Spell Shaper, or Spark Shaper, excuse me, the name of the card slipped me on there. I'm all ears. Let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you for watching, and have a great day.